Inside the vehicle yard at Gough Barracks in Armagh, sometime in the late 1990s, an RUC sergeant would walk visitors past a Toyota Hiace van. The van was painted the colour of a hospital corridor and had not been repainted. The side panels had bullet entry points the sergeant could put his little finger through. The windscreen was gone. The driver's seat was the original 1986 fabric, dark from things that had dried on it and never been washed off. He would not tell the visitors who had driven it. He did not have to. They knew. The van had been driven across a field in County Armagh on the evening of the 8th of May 1987, with 7 men in it, and it had not been driven again. There is one photograph of the van in the yard. The Irish News printed it in May 2018. ConflictNI had shared it 4 years earlier. The angle is wrong for a museum piece. It's the angle of a man with a personal camera standing on the gravel, taking a picture of a thing nobody told him to take a picture of. That is how the picture of the most photographed, unmuseumed artefact of the Northern Ireland conflict came to exist. The van's registration was GJI 4417. The owner was a man called Colm McGrath. The driver who had it that day was Peter Corr. At about 2:30 on the afternoon of the 8th of May 1987, 2 armed men in hoods walked into a snooker club on Mountjoy Road in Dungannon, and the van was no longer either of theirs. The owner was told not to report it stolen for 4 hours. He did not. By 4:30 that afternoon, the van had been driven northeast, parked, loaded with 5 men carrying weapons, and was sitting on a lane outside Loughgall in County Armagh, waiting on a digger. The digger came from somewhere else. It came from Aginlig, Upper Dungannon, on the Lislasley Road, just outside the village of Moy. The farm belonged to Josephine Mackle. At about 6 o'clock in the evening, 3 men entered the Mackle home and told the family they were taking the digger. They took it at 6:45. The brief that produced this video has the JCB coming from a place called Mountjoy Farm. It did not. Mountjoy is the road in Dungannon, and what came from there was the van. The digger was a JCB hijacked from a farm called Mackle on Lislasley Road in a townland called Aginlig in the parish of Tartaragan. These details matter because there is a paragraph in 2 books and a footnote in a 3rd where this distinction is the only one that has been preserved. The man who drove the digger was Declan Arthurs. He was 21. He was born in Galbally, County Tyrone, on the 28th of October 1965. He had joined the East Tyrone Brigade of the Provisional IRA in 1982, 4 months after the death of Martin Herson, another Galbally man, on the 1981 hunger strike. He had a young daughter. He worked on his father's agricultural contracting business. He could drive a digger. That was the entire qualification. The same young man had driven the same kind of machine, with the same kind of bomb, in the same kind of bucket 9 months earlier, on the 11th of August 1986, through the perimeter fence of the unmanned RUC station at the Birches near Portadown. That attack had worked. The station had been destroyed by a 200-pound bomb. The IRA cell had walked off in the dark. The same 5 names that would later be inside the van at Loughgall, Patrick Kelly, Jim Linner, Padraig McKerney, were the strategists of the Birches attack. The Loughgall plan was a copy of the Birches plan. The Loughgall date, May 8, 1987, was 9 months on, almost to the day. The IRA strategy of attacking remote, lightly defended RUC stations and preventing their reconstruction was, at that point, a published doctrine, named by Jim Linner and Padraig McKerney, who advocated denying ground to British forces by industrialising the demolition of police facilities. The strategy worked once, at the Birches. It did not work twice. Inside the front bucket of the JCB, partially hidden by builder's rubble, was an oil drum filled with somewhere between 200 and 400 pounds of a Semtex-based device, depending on which book you read. It had been assembled near Ardbow and carried by boat across Lough Neagh to Maghery on the morning of the attack. There were two 40-second fuses. The lighter was a Zippo. A photograph that has circulated in some Republican commemorations claims to show Arthurs lying dead on the grass at Loughgall, with that Zippo still in his right hand. Whether the photograph is what it claims to be is contested. What is not contested is that the lighter was meant to be the last thing he did. He was going to light a 40-second fuse, run, get into the back of the van, and go. He did not get into the back of the van. None of them did. By 7:15 in the evening of the 8th of May 1987, the digger had crossed the perimeter of the RUC station at Loughgall. By 7:16, somewhere between 500 and 600 rounds had been fired at the van. By 7:17, all 8 men of the East Tyrone Active Service Unit were dead, and a civilian called Anthony Hughes was dying in the front of his white Citroën behind the van, while his brother Oliver beside him, also a civilian, also wholly innocent of any wrongdoing, had been hit 14 times and was somehow still alive. The blast destroyed half of the police station. The remaining half stood. By 9:15 that night, the Quick Reaction Force was on the ground, and the first SAS extraction helicopter was lifting off the field. The morning of the 9th of May 1987 was what this video is about. Because what nobody on the SAS side, or the RUC side, or the IRA side, or the journalist side has fully traced is what happened in the hours between dawn and noon on the 9th of May. When the engagement was over, the bodies had been counted, and the artifacts of the engagement were physical objects sitting on a piece of ground that the British state now had to do something with. The bomb was still on the digger. The digger was at the perimeter fence. The van was on the lane, perforated. 8 rifles, 1 shotgun, 1 revolver, and a quantity of webbing, balaclavas and ammunition were scattered between them. By dawn on the 9th, the Royal Engineers bomb disposal team were on site. By the end of the morning, the bomb had been made safe. The vehicles had been towed. The weapons had been forensically tagged. And what came next did not have a doctrine attached to it. The 8 firearms recovered at Loughgall were 3 Heckler & Koch G3 rifles, 1 FN-FAL rifle, 2 FN-FNC rifles, a Franchi SPAS-12 shotgun, and a Ruger Security 6 revolver. RUC Chief Superintendent Harry Breen displayed them to the media in Armagh on the morning of the 9th. By 1995, the firearms had been ballistically linked by the RUC to 7 known murders and 12 attempted murders. By 2017, declassified material would push that link to between 40 and 50 killings, including every fatality in IRA attacks in counties Fermanagh and Tyrone in 1987 before the ambush. The weapons themselves vanished into the evidence chain. Where they went is broadly traceable. The RUC's later successor body, the PSNI, has held Troubles-era exhibits at a complex called Sea Park near Carrickfergus, sometimes referred to in the Northern Irish press as the Murder Archive. Whether the specific Loughgall firearms are still there is not on public record, but the institutional pathway exists. The bomb, made safe by the Royal Engineers, would have been disposed of according to the bomb disposal protocols of the period, which means destroyed in a controlled environment. The empty oil drum, the Semtex residue, the wiring, the fuses, these were physical things that ceased to exist within hours. The JCB digger is the harder thing to track. Once made safe and towed, it disappears from the public record. Sources broadly agree it was destroyed. There are unsourced claims that parts were retained, claims that parts were buried, claims that the bucket itself was kept somewhere as an oddity. None of these claims has a published source. The most defensible thing to say about the digger is that nobody has produced a paper trail. The van is the artifact this video can describe. The Toyota Hiace was towed from the lane at Loughgall on the morning of the 9th of May 1987. It was, in a formal sense, a civilian vehicle, registered to Colin McGrath, hijacked by force, returned to police custody as evidence. In a practical sense, it had been struck by more than 125 rounds of British rifle fire and was beyond any reasonable claim to be repaired or returned. By the end of May, the van was at Gough Barracks in Armagh, the RUC's regional facility established in 1773 as a British infantry barracks, depot of the Royal Irish Fusiliers from 1881 to 1960, headquarters of the 2nd Battalion of the Ulster Defence Regiment from 1970 to 1975, vacated by the British Army in 1976. And an RUC and later PSNI policing base from then onwards. This is where the brief that produced this video and the audience comment that inspired it both need to be softened. The audience records the van as kept on display at Gough Barracks. The formal documentary trail is thinner than the claim. There is no signage in any photograph. There is no record of any RUC museum piece designation. There is no public visitor register. The Records Office of Northern Ireland holds RUC operational papers in volume, but no document specifically curating the Loughgall van as a museum piece has surfaced in any catalogue searched. What there is something else. What there is a photograph of the van rusting in the Gough yard around 1997, about 10 years after the ambush. There is a comment posted by a former RUC member on the same photograph that reads, "During continuity training in 1988, we'd have parties in the back of it. The orange lights of HG made for an interesting spectacle as they shone the very many bullet holes." There is a follow-up by the same former officer that reads, "Took loads of it on my photography course." There is the parallel testimony of a journalist called Anthony Lloyd, who was a British Army infantry platoon commander in the late 1980s, and who later wrote in the Times that a wall at the training camp he attended before his Northern Ireland deployment was decked with close-up colour photographs of the 8 members of the IRA's East Tyrone Brigade killed in an SAS ambush at Loughgall. Lloyd added that the same images were replayed to us at the start of training videos to the soundtrack of Another One Bites the Dust. None of that is a museum. What it is a culture. A culture in which a captured vehicle did not need a label because everybody in the regiment knew what the bullet holes meant. A culture in which an RUC training course routinely took photographs of an artifact that nobody had decided to formally retain. A culture in which the men who used the van for what they called parties were not making a formal statement and were not breaking a formal rule, because there was no formal rule, because the artifact had no formal status, because the artifact had been towed in as evidence and never towed out again. The van was retained at Gough for the better part of a decade as something between an evidence hold, a morale piece, and a tacit warning to anyone who walked through the yard. It was a thing. When the 2018 Irish news story broke, Conla Young, crime and security correspondent, working from screenshots of the Facebook comments under the photograph, the political reaction was as predictable as the institutional silence that followed it. Francie Malloy, the Sinn Féin MP for Mid-Ulster, called the parties in van revelation sickening and will only add to the hurt and grief of the families. The PSNI did not respond on the record. The MOD did not respond. No former officer named himself. The photograph stayed up. The comments stayed up. The story moved on. And the family-side framing, articulated 5 years later by Mairead Kelly, sister of Patrick Kelly, in a different Irish news piece in January 2023, was the question the institutional silence had not answered. The thing that bothers us the most is the fact somebody is actually sitting somewhere with that, and does this get taken out and displayed? The independent councillor Barry Monteith called the broader pattern of trophy treatment disgusting behaviour, but not surprising. And the most accurate single sentence about the van is that nobody knows whether anybody officially decided it should still be there in 1997. The next question is when it stopped being there. The answer the public record will support is 1998. In 1998, an asbestos discovery at Gough Barracks resulted in the destruction of substantial quantities of conflict-related material held at the site. The discovery is documented in a Police Service of Northern Ireland Freedom of Information disclosure, reference number 00750. The destruction is referenced again in 2020 by the Irish News, when bereaved families raised concerns about PSNI custody of Troubles-era exhibits, and pointed to the 1998 destruction as the precedent that worried them. What was destroyed at Gough in 1998 is not enumerated in the public-facing version of the disclosure. The phrasing is generic: substantial conflict-related material. We know the van was at Gough around 1997. We know an asbestos-driven destruction of substantial conflict-related material happened at Gough in 1998. We know no photograph of the van at Gough, taken later than the late 1990s, has surfaced. We know no other photograph has emerged from a successor facility either. Sea Park, where remaining PSNI exhibits are now held, has been searched in journalism around the 2020 storage controversy, and no Loughgall van is in the public coverage. The most defensible single sentence about the van's onward journey is that the asbestos discovery at Gough in 1998 is the most likely terminus of its residency at the barracks, and that what happened to it after that is not in the public record. There is no documented offer to the Imperial War Museum, no documented decline, no documented transfer to a regimental collection. There is the 1998 event, and there is silence after it, which makes the van different from the other artefacts the engagement produced. The 8 rifles entered the formal evidence chain and outlived the engagement by decades. The bomb did not survive the morning of the 9th of May 1987. The digger disappears in a fog of unsourced claims. The map of the operations room at Loughgall, the contemporaneous notes, the dispatch logs, all in Prony, the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland in Belfast, mostly under the standard 30-year rule, mostly available now if you know which catalogue to ask. The photographs of the dead taken by the RUC Scene of Crime team became, according to Anthony Lloyd, training camp wall art within months. The single missing canine tooth from Patrick Kelly's mouth, recorded in the pathology report as the right upper canine tooth had recently been torn out, is the subject of an enduring family claim, articulated by Mairead Kelly in the Irish News in January 2023, that it was taken as a trophy. The agency has never been established. The right upper canine tooth, like the van, sits in a category for which there is no formal disposition record. What links the rifles, the digger, the photographs, the tooth, and the van is the same gap. The British state had a procedure for the firearms: evidence chain, custody, ballistic register, court production. The British state did not have a procedure for an obliterated van. It did not have a procedure for the pieces of a destroyed digger. It did not have a procedure for the photographs the SOCO team produced. It did not have a procedure for a missing tooth from a body returned to a family. Everything in that second category lived in a gap. The gap was institutional, not malicious. There was no doctrine on what to do with the physical residue of a counter-terror engagement once the legal proceedings had concluded and the political proceedings had calmed down. So the residue stayed where it had been towed. That is the spine of this video. It is not really about the van, it is about the gap. The gap had a duration. For Loughgall, the gap was roughly from May 1987 to the late 1990s, about 10 years in which the van sat at Gough, sometimes photographed, sometimes the subject of off-duty social activity. Never officially curated, never officially designated. The audience comment that produced this brief, 101 likes under a Loughgall video, an artifact ask in a single self-contained scene, described the van being kept on display. The audience commenter was not making it up. The van was there. The display was real. The display was simply not formal. And the way English-language news reporting handles the difference between a formal display and an informal trophy is to use the word stored for the second case and displayed for the first. The audience used the word displayed because that is how it felt to the people who walked past it. The two readings can coexist. They have to coexist because both are true. The gap also had a closure. The closure, in this case, was almost certainly the 1998 asbestos discovery. The destruction was not symbolic and was not political. Asbestos was found. Asbestos in a working facility is a regulatory event. The regulatory response was to clear the site of the affected material. The affected material happened to include substantial quantities of conflict-related artifacts, because the affected material was wherever the affected material had been left. Nobody in 1998 sat in a room and decided that the Loughgall van had served its institutional purpose. The asbestos sat in a room and the van went with it. The wider field, the regimental museums, the police museum, the Imperial War Museum, the Public Record Office, the Special Air Service's own archive at Hereford. None of these places, in any catalogue searchable from the open record, lists the Loughgall Toyota Hiace van by registration number. The brief that produced this video speculated that the van might have ended up in a private collection, a regimental store, or as an Imperial War Museum offer that was declined. The honest answer is that the public record does not support any of these. What the public record supports is that the van was at Gough, was photographed at Gough, was used informally at Gough, and was likely destroyed at Gough in 1998 as a side effect of an asbestos clearance operation. After that, there are no further records. The digger's parallel fate is harder because it begins from a thinner base. The van is at least documented by a photograph at Gough in 1997. The digger is documented as having been at the perimeter fence at Loughgall on the night of the 8th of May 1987 and is then towed away on the 9th and effectively disappears. Some sources, repeating each other, say the digger was scrapped at the same evidence recovery yard the van was towed to. Other sources, repeating each other, say parts were retained, but no source identifies what parts, where they went, or who has them. The shape of the rumour is consistent with what the security forces did with other captured PIRA improvisation devices through the late 1980s. Destroyed centrally, photographed for record, written up in classified after-action reports, and not preserved as objects. The most defensible answer about the digger is that it does not survive in the public record after dawn on the 9th of May 1987. There is a single complicating fact about the digger that is worth recording. The JCB taken from the Mackle farm was described, in one careful reconstruction, as lighter and less powerful than the machine deployed at the Birches 9 months earlier. Whether that mattered tactically is a separate question. What it tells us about the disposition is that the cell improvised its choice of machine on the day, that the bomb mounting in the bucket was a workshop job done somewhere between the Mackle yard at 7:15 and the perimeter fence at 9:15, and that the welding on the bucket, if there was welding, would have been the most distinctive forensic feature of the digger after the engagement. Whether any photographs of the bucket mount welding survive in the classified after-action material is not on public record. The 2025 inquest may, in time, produce it. The 2025 inquest may not. The H&K casings, the spent British cartridge cases that the forensic team picked up off the road outside the station, 600 of them, 3 for every IRA round fired, those entered the evidence chain. The 78 IRA cartridges from the inside of the van and the digger cabin and the roadside did too. The forensic ballistics work was the basis of the 1995 inquest. The 2001 European Court of Human Rights judgment in Kelly and others versus United Kingdom, and the 2025 inquest that Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn restored under the Post-Legacy Act framework. Whether the specific casings are still in PSNI custody at Sea Park is not, again, on the open record. The ballistic register is. The casings themselves are in the same category as the van, physical objects with no formal institutional designation, sitting wherever they were last placed. The 1995 inquest is itself worth a sentence here, because it sits inside the same gap. The inquest concluded that all 9 men, the 8 IRA volunteers and Anthony Hughes, had died from serious and multiple gunshot wounds. The 6 families of IRA volunteers withdrew their legal representation on the second day, because the coroner would not provide certain documentation. Forensic scientist James Smith Wallace testified that a stone on top of a rifle on the chest of one of the dead men indicated the man had been killed before the explosion. That single testimonial detail has been read in 2 directions ever since. As evidence the IRA cell was struck down before the bomb went off, or as evidence that the cell was struck down after the bomb went off and the stone fell from the blast onto an already dead body. The inquest did not resolve the question. The European Court of Human Rights, ruling in 2001 in Kelly and others versus United Kingdom, found the United Kingdom in breach of its Article 2 procedural obligations on the investigation. The court did not adjudicate the use of force itself. The Hughes family received their formal Ministry of Defence apology in 2014, 27 years after Anthony Hughes was killed and Oliver Hughes was shot 14 times in a Citroën GS, both of them wholly innocent of any wrongdoing. The 2025 inquest reopens the same questions with the same documentary base, and, in principle, with a now 38-year-old physical evidence inventory that no one has produced in full. The power gel residue, the Semtex residue, the wiring, the timing mechanisms, those did not survive the controlled disposal protocol. There is no Loughgall bomb in any museum, because there was no Loughgall bomb left to put anywhere. The operations room map, the briefing map the SAS commander used to brief the operators inside the station, is, in the absence of a Freedom of Information request that has produced it, presumed to be either at Prony, under the 30-year rule, which would now release it, or at the Ministry of Defence archive, or destroyed. Whether any researcher has applied for it is not in the public record. The 2025 inquest may now produce it. And so, 40 years on from the engagement, what survives of Loughgall in physical form is this: 8 rifles, possibly still in PSNI custody at a complex in Carrickfergus. Hundreds of spent cartridge cases, possibly there too. A formal ballistic register and forensic report set in police archive. A funeral programme from each of the 8 Republican burials between the 11th and the 15th of May 1987 in family hands and in Republican commemorative archives. An MOD apology to the Hughes family from 2014 in family hands. A series of contemporaneous photographs of the dead, some of them on the wall of a British Army training camp by the end of 1987, according to Anthony Lloyd, presumably no longer there. A photograph of a rusting blue Toyota Hiace van at Gough Barracks, taken sometime around 1997 by a former RUC officer on a photography course. A photograph of the digger at the perimeter, taken by the same forensic team on the morning of the 9th of May 1987. The 2001 European Court judgment. The 2014 MOD apology. The 2025 restoration of the inquest. The van itself is, by the best read of the available record, gone. There is a comment under the Loughgall video. It is 101 likes. It says the writer saw the van. They are not lying. The van was there. It sat in the yard at Gough Barracks for the better part of 20 years. Unwashed, unrepaired, and was probably the most photographed, unmuseumed artefact of the Northern Ireland conflict. Then the base closed. Then it was gone. Where it is now, this video has tried to track. What it was, and what was inside it on the evening of May 8, 1987, this video has been able to describe in full.